Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. President Trump certainly wouldn't back down on his commitment to keep the caravan out of this country, border security, and essentially empowering and providing the civilian political backing to Border Patrol to do their jobs yesterday, as many on the left complained about the use of tear gas on members of the caravan, crowds of the caravan, really, that attempted to bust into this country. Trump asked the question by the D.C. press corps before he left for Mississippi, saying this.
Are you comfortable tear gassing children like what we saw before?
They're not, as you know, they're not. They had to use because they were being rushed by some very tough people, and they used tear gas. And here's the bottom line. Nobody's coming into our country unless they come in legally.
And the bottom line from Rodney Scott, who's the chief Border Patrol agent for the San Diego sector, who spoke to CNN, is that people that he and his officers dealt with were not asylum seekers.
So one of our primary missions is to make sure that we keep the border safe and secure. I kind of challenged that this was a peaceful protest or that the majority of these people were claiming asylum. We ended up making about 42 arrests. Only 8 of those were females, and there were only a few children involved. The vast majority of the people we're dealing with are adult males. Similar to what we saw the first wave of the caravan that came up about a week or so ago, the group immediately started throwing rocks and debris at our agents, taunting the agents. And once our agents were assaulted and the numbers started growing, we had 2 or 3 agents at a time initially facing hundreds of people at a time. They deployed tear gas to protect themselves and to protect the border.
But that was unpersuasive to the ACLU. Lee Gallant, deputy director of the ACLU's Immigrant Rights Project, said the tear gas was excessive.
He said if they really were asylum seekers, they would have walked up with their hands up instead of, he says, throwing rocks.
Yeah, well, look, no one wants any border officer to be in danger. But from what we know, this was an overuse of force. I mean, there are women and children out there. Using tear gas in this situation does not seem justified. We are investigating the facts on the ground. But the Border Patrol has a history of using unnecessary force.
Well, force that was directed under President Obama, because during his time in office, 56 times tear gas pepper spray was used along the border.
Well, the ACLU would say that was excessive then, too. What the ACLU won't say is what they think Border Patrol should do when dozens, if not hundreds of people bum rush their officers to try and get into this country illegally. That was the question, the follow-up question not asked of Mr. Gallant, to no one's surprise, on CNN. For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by Mark Krikorian, who is the executive director for the Center for Immigration Studies. Mark, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
So tear gas excessive or not excessive in the circumstance?
I mean, that's an absurd lie. I'm sorry. This was not people lining up to apply for asylum. There was a protest, people with signs, let us in, that kind of thing. Normal protest to Mexico. It was in Mexico, and they just, allowed it. They weren't doing anything. But of the protest, several hundred guys apparently broke off, pushed past the Mexican police, essentially assaulted the police to try to rush through the border crossings, were stopped there. Instead, then, they found a gap in the fence because they're repairing the fence there, and dozens of them rushed through, threw rocks and bottles at the Border Patrol officer. Officers. There was a mob, and they broke up the mob without using their guns. Nobody was shot. They used non-lethal methods. The idea that this is somehow outrageous is itself outrageous. It wasn't like a kindergarten class, and they were, using tear gas on them. The tear gas was, the kids and the women were, most of them, in the protest itself that wasn't rushing the border, but the wind carries this stuff the way it does. I mean, was not only perfectly legitimate, this showed amazing restraint on the part of the border officers.
And once they got through, they arrested 42 people, 8 females and just a few children, correct?
Right, because the people rushing the border and then trying to sneak through that opening in the fence figured, this is their chance. They're going to go for it. If they were actual asylum seekers, their names would be on the list. They might have to wait a few weeks to get their turn for an interview. But these guys didn't want to wait. And frankly, part of the reason they didn't want to wait is because they know that they have no claim for asylum. The Central Americans are using an asylum claim as a way of getting past the border. They know they're not going to get it. They want to be released into the U.S. so that they can then disappear.
No, I mean, given this story, it's sort of interesting, the juxtaposition of this story. The Honduran president's brother, Juan Orlando Hernandez's brother, arrested in Miami, charged with drug trafficking, not just with drug trafficking, but frankly being a drug kingpin in Honduras. So, I mean, this is not to say that the cartels in Mexico and in Central America aren't real, and there may not be some asylum seekers that are seeking asylum for political or religious reasons targeted by the cartels or what have you. But we're supposed to distinguish those individuals from economic migrants, and the D.C. press corps just seems intent on conflating the two issues.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, asylum, the bar for asylum has to be kept kind of high because otherwise everybody in the world would apply. You would be eligible for asylum. Right. The fact is you have to be persecuted personally by your government because of your race, your religion, nationality, political opinion, or what's called membership in a particular social group. If you don't qualify in those, for instance, if what you want is just a better job because your country is poor, or even if you're fleeing violence, that's not grounds for asylum. And yet, under Obama, they started giving asylum, or at least an initial bite at the apple for asylum, way too broadly. And anyone who applied was released into the U.S. with, a piece of paper saying, show up 2 years from now. And that created an incentive to come. Why wouldn't you? Back in 2014, this is when this broke in the news, I sent a team down to South Texas, and one of my guys there talked to a woman from El Salvador who had brought her kids up, and she literally said, we saw on CNN, we were watching CNN in El Salvador, and they were saying that if you bring kids with you, they let you go. And so we figured we'd give it a try.
Wow. Speaking of children, I mean, the picture that Reuters took of a migrant mother fleeing the tear gas with her 2 children, one's in diapers. Do you think that was staged? I mean, her name is Maria Mesa, and she claims, she told NBC's Gabe Gutierrez that she wasn't crossing the border illegally, but trying to seek asylum.
Yeah, I don't think that was staged. I mean, I think she was probably at the protest. But a couple of questions. Why would you be schlepping 2 kids? Actually, she brought 5 of her children with her, is the way she put it. 5 of her children. Those were the younger ones with her. Why would you bring them to a protest? Why didn't you take up Mexico on its offer of asylum, as a couple of thousand of these caravan people did? Yeah. I'm sorry, but these are people who either have relatives here or they figure they're going to be able to get a job here, and they're not seeking safety. They're seeking they're economic migrants. Look, asylum is like you're drowning and you're going to grab at whichever life preserver is closest to hand. If you're not grabbing the closest one, you're not desperate. And these people turned down Mexico's offer of asylum and said, heck with that, we're going to go for the U.S. I'm sorry, there's no excuse for that.
Yeah, you know who would like an offer of asylum, and I'm a little bit ashamed that Trump has not extended one. I'm going to keep beating this drum. Asia Bibi in Pakistan.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, this is a cut and dry case of protection. Now, technically, you have to be in the country or at a port of entry to claim asylum. But what we could just do is admit her as a refugee. I mean, there's no reason. I don't understand why we haven't made a big deal of that. Now, there are other countries that have also extended an offer of asylum to her. The issue is, how does she get out of Pakistan? I'm hoping that what the issue is we're trying to talk behind the scenes with the Pakistani government and get them to let her go, because she can't leave Pakistan. They took her passport.
Right, but I mean, what an opportunity it would be for him to make a public call to on the government of Pakistan. And oh, by the way, there are a lot of financial strings that could be attached to this, that we will provide safe harbor to Asia Bibi. We're sending a special forces unit to get her, so have her ready. And it would be such a teachable moment for Trump with respect to this country about what our asylum is for versus what's happening on the border.
No, I agree completely. My only qualification is it could be they're working with the Pakistanis to get her out behind
perhaps.
the scenes
Sure.
because, if you make a big deal of it, then they're going to dig their heels in and all the rest of it. You know what I mean? So
Sure.
you might be right. Maybe Trump is blowing this, and, wouldn't surprise me. Look, the guy can do that. But I'm hoping that we're actually working behind the scenes to get her out of there.
Yeah. And are there any other caravans that are on the way to the U.S. border?
Yeah, there are reports of several caravans on the way, although it looks like the Mexicans are getting more serious about stopping these things because this has been going on for several years, not just Central Americans, too. It's Africans and Asians and others. And the Mexicans basically just waved them through. As long as they were going to the U.S., they don't care. Be out by sundown, and otherwise they don't care. Now that they're backing up at the border, the Mexicans aren't real happy about it. Not the mayor of Tijuana over the weekend. He went to a protest with a red baseball cap that said, "Make Tijuana great again." And so they're ticked off about this. So the Mexican police down in southern Mexico are doing a better job of stopping this, but apparently there's a bunch of people sort of, en route, and so there's more people coming all the time.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the de facto head of the Democrat Socialist Party, tweeted yesterday that asking to be considered a refugee and applying for status isn't a crime. It wasn't for Jewish families fleeing Germany. It wasn't for targeted families fleeing Rwanda. It wasn't for communities fleeing war-torn Syria. And it isn't for those fleeing violence in Central America.
Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of dopey thing I would expect from somebody like this. The fact is, these people are not fleeing genocide. They're not even real refugees, and they're already in Mexico, which has its own asylum system, which has offered them the ability to apply for asylum and has given it to several thousand of these people already. So, sorry, but this is, everything is not the Holocaust, and it demeans people who actually went through that. Demeans my own grandparents who lived through the precursor to the Holocaust, the Armenian genocide, to somehow compare people who are trying to get a better job to people who are fleeing for their lives.
And it seems to me the best play in response to that sort of sophomoric sentimentalism is okay. What's your proposal? I want to understand what exactly your plan is and what you think the implications are, because the left gets away with this sort of sentimentality, specious as it is, because they're never held to say, I'm for open borders and I want to abolish ICE. I mean, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez will admit it, but we need to continue to allow her to amplify her position.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's really the issue is what is your limiting principle? In other words, you're saying in this case, this person should be able to get in. Fine. Where would you draw the line?
Mm-hmm.
What are you willing to do to enforce immigration laws? And I actually have a piece up on National Review Online this morning basically making the point that even though the Democrats deny that they're for open borders, they're actually against every measure to enforce immigration laws. So they are, in fact, objectively speaking, they are for open borders. They need to come out and admit it. I mean, there are people I've debated, honest people who say they are, in fact, for open borders. Okay, that's a plausible position. Come out and be honest about it. The problem is the Democrats are for open borders, but they're unwilling to say it.
He is Mark Krikorian, Executive Director for the Center for Immigration Studies, and you can catch his work routinely, as he mentioned, nationalreview.com. Mark, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro